All right, welcome to today's talk on portfolio management. We'll be talking about the new dynamic of portfolio management and what's powering that dynamic. As you know, portfolio management has been quoted as one of the most important use cases of Smartsheet. So today we'll look at holistic look at the field of portfolio management and how we use Smartsheet to cover this very important aspect. Now, before we begin, let me talk briefly about my journey with PPM, Project Portfolio Management. I am a project management professional. I've got more than 22 years of IT management experience. I've managed large project portfolios at leading Silicon Valley firms such as Facebook, Cisco, Symantec, Kaiser Permanente. I've acquired an extensive knowledge of the full spectrum of portfolio capabilities, and I've also pioneered a simplified form of earned value management called MEM. And by the way of education, I have a technical degree from Bangalore University and also an MBA from Purdue. And I've also written a book on portfolio management. This was Breakthrough Project Portfolio Management. I wrote it in 2017, and it's been very well received. So much so that I've now written a second book on portfolio management, and this one is a lot more detailed. It literally holds your hand as you walk through what you need to do to set up a portfolio. So now let's look at the key building blocks of a portfolio, and I'll walk you through the important components. Okay, so let's start with what is a project? Almost everything is a project these days, and every kind of organization creates them, not just IT. There used to be a time when most projects meant IT projects, but now there's been an explosion in the definition of a project, in the number of projects, because everybody's doing projects. And naturally, it follows that to manage these projects, everyone now must be a project manager. So it's important to ask a couple of questions. Number one, what is a project? What can go wrong in a project? And what is the role of a project portfolio? And what does a good portfolio look like? And finally, the need for a portfolio manager. So to cover these at a high level, what is a project? A project is defined as a temporary endeavor to create a unique product or service. In other words, project is something we do for a limited amount of time, whether it's, it could be weeks or months, but it has a beginning and an end, and it produces a distinct result. And once that's done, the project is over. What can go wrong in a project? In a nutshell, anything and everything can go wrong in a project. To understand why, you have to go back to the previous bullet and see what is a project. So a project, like we said, is a temporary effort. This temporary effort has not only limited time, but also limited resources. And there are also some pretty distinct ideas about what it needs to produce. So there are so many constraints and so many unknowns. So it's no wonder that many things can go wrong in a project. Okay, so what is the role of a project portfolio? To understand this, we've got to go a little bit in depth here. So when you see what can go wrong in a project, it could be anything, and almost all projects run into difficulty. But there's a curious dynamic in how projects go wrong. If you have a collection of projects, say 10 projects, most of the projects will run quite all right at any point of time. It's only a couple of them that will get into serious difficulty and need immediate attention. This doesn't mean the others will run fine all the time, but just that at any point of time, a couple of projects are in serious need of attention and need to be pulled back on track, if you will. So that is the advantage of running projects in a portfolio. A portfolio is basically a collection of projects. So when you run these projects as a collection, you can quickly zoom into the couple of projects in a portfolio that need help and leave the others alone. And the second benefit of a portfolio is all projects share a common set of standards. So it's easy to spot when something is going off the rails. If you measure cost and quality and schedule in the same way, it's easy to see that a couple of projects are falling out of bounds, and then we quickly go and fix that. So several advantages of using a project portfolio, which is basically managing projects as a bunch. So what does a good portfolio look like? A good portfolio has some characteristics, and let's see what these characteristics are. And this is the new book that's coming out, and we'll talk more about it. So we'll leaf through it and talk about what are the characteristics of a good portfolio. Now, one of the important characteristics of a good portfolio is that it's comprehensive. What does that mean? It means that every project that's running should be in my portfolio. So I should have the confidence that if I go to the portfolio and see 10 projects, I don't have 11th and 12th floating around somewhere. The portfolio should be comprehensive. It should include all the projects. That gives me confidence in the portfolio. And the second key characteristic is everything in the portfolio should be updated. So I shouldn't be looking at months old, outdated information. So I should have some confidence that the content in the portfolio is reasonably updated. Also, I'd be looking to get basic information about all projects in my portfolio. So the portfolio needs to be well described. So if I see a project in my portfolio, I need to see who's asking for it, who's the customer, who's doing it, who's the project manager, when does it start, when does it finish, the basic stuff. All that should be available, easily available for every project in the portfolio. And it should also be well reported. What does that mean? Imagine I have a large portfolio, 100 projects. I should not have to comb through 100 projects to find out the ones that are relevant to finance. Imagine I work in finance. So if there might be 25 projects that belong to finance. So I'm looking to get a quick way to sort or filter the projects to the ones that are relevant to me and not wade through all 100 projects. And another big characteristic of a good portfolio is that there is regulation and governance. What does that mean? It means that there's a body of people that are looking at the projects, making some tough decisions about it, deciding what projects get into the portfolio, deciding which projects to terminate, which projects to give money to, take money away from, so many things. At the end of the day, there needs to be a responsible body of people who are actively engaged with the portfolio and giving it leadership. We call that governance. And two other characteristics for a good portfolio are scalability and flexibility. As we previously mentioned, there's an explosion in the number of projects. It's common knowledge that if you start with 100 projects in your portfolio, within the next year or two, you could be looking at twice or thrice the number. So whatever you build as your portfolio should be able to scale up in terms of numbers. And it should also be flexible. Imagine we want to, say, track a new attribute for all projects, whether, say, they're COVID-19 related, pandemic related. So it should be relatively easy to flex it and say, here's a column that describes whether every project in the portfolio is affected by COVID-19 or not, just as an example. So collectively, that's what a good portfolio looks like. You can get more details in the book. So moving on, what is the need for a portfolio manager? A portfolio manager is almost a logical outgrowth of a good portfolio. A good portfolio doesn't naturally organize itself and run itself without a good portfolio manager. Behind every one of the characteristics that I just mentioned, there is a good portfolio manager who ensures that all these things happen. So a good portfolio manager is synonymous with a good portfolio. Now, moving on, let's see what it takes to pull off all this. So it's no secret that the constraints are only multiplying in today's world. We always have to do more with less. We have to get more done in less time, with less resources, with less information. So it's very important to find some methods or best practices that even the playing field in your favor. And this presentation will talk about exactly how to do that. So moving to the next slide, let's talk about implementing the basic portfolio. So there are a set of characteristics, building blocks, if you will, small in number, but very vital to the basic portfolio. If you're successful in implementing these components, you can rest assured that your portfolio will succeed. So let's look at what these components are. So the first component of a basic portfolio is going to be portfolio intake and assessment. What is portfolio intake? Why does it matter? Portfolio intake is the process by which projects get into the portfolio. Now, if there is no quality control of projects that get into a portfolio, you'll find that the whole portfolio is affected by what I call low quality projects. What I mean by that is, if there's no quality control in making sure that the right kind of projects get into the portfolio, pretty soon there will be a huge number of projects in the portfolio, many of them incorrectly described, incorrectly resourced, many with blank fields, wrong information. Pretty soon, the confidence in the portfolio is completely gone. So that's why portfolio intake is sort of a quality gate to ensure that a project meets certain minimum criteria before it's included in the portfolio. So that's why portfolio intake matters. So let's look at some of the characteristics of a high performance portfolio intake. So when we talk about characteristics of a high performance portfolio intake, number one, it has to be efficient and responsive. So when a project proposal is submitted for inclusion in the portfolio, it should be pretty rapid in whether the project proposal is accepted into the portfolio or rejected. It can't be in limbo for a long time. And it might even help to have an SLA in place to say, within 3 days, we'll decide on whether this project proposal can get into the portfolio or not. The second thing is, this is a common requirement. It should be easy to use. I should find it easy to submit a project proposal into the portfolio. And that means, the form should be well crafted, providing the user with the right resources to answer all the questions. And a good portfolio intake will also be backed up by effective governance. So when I submit a proposal, the right kind of eyes are looking at it and saying, okay, this project seems like it belongs in our portfolio and we have the money to do it and it has all the right information. Somebody should be looking at it. And finally, a good portfolio intake is fiscally responsible. What does that mean? So imagine a portfolio with a certain budget, and all this budget has been allocated to a bunch of running projects. Now, if you're trying to throw a new project into the mix, the portfolio intake should be in a position to assess whether we have the money to do it. Money, resources, it could be anything, could be both. And if we don't have the resources to do it, the portfolio intake should point it out and say, do not start this project. You don't have the manpower or the budget to do it. So those are the characteristics of a high performance portfolio intake. Now let's look at some challenges and success factors. So number one, you've got to identify the portfolio type and then design the intake for that portfolio. When I say portfolio type, there are two broad types of portfolios. One is a strategic portfolio. That means big projects that are very important, and they need to be screened carefully to make sure that they are in alignment with the strategic direction of the organization. And then what we call a tactical portfolio. This includes a lot of smaller projects, and there's a huge volume, and you can't take a long time screening for them. The throughput needs to be rapid, so the projects keep executing. So, as I mentioned, portfolios usually fall into one of these two types. So it's important to recognize what type it is and then design the intake. So the intake for a strategic portfolio will be rapid. The intake for a strategic portfolio will be deliberate and will have a lot of filtering. And the intake for a functional or tactical portfolio will be rapid and the throughput will be high. The second challenge and or success factor for a portfolio is don't collect too many pieces of information or too few pieces of information during portfolio intake. The trouble with collecting too many pieces is that the form becomes so huge that most people try to escape it. They try to avoid using the form and just trying to start projects without going through intake, which is very defeating. On the flip side, collecting too few fields is also a big problem, because once you've started a project without having collected all the information, it can be very hard to go back and get that information. Nobody is willing to provide all that info after the project has started. It can be very hard. And the next big success factor is to establish an SLA for portfolio intake. So we've defined a portfolio intake, and we want to know, is it working? Are we turning the project proposals around quickly? Are we taking too much time? So the only way to know this is to define an SLA, publish it, and then see if we're able to meet it. That's a good test of whether we've got the right kind of functioning for the portfolio intake. Finally, it can be very useful to show the velocity of proposals through portfolio intake. What does this mean? It means when a user submits a proposal, it's very important to show the visibility of where that proposal is in intake. We could say it's been received and being reviewed, and then reviewed and approved or rejected, whatever may be the case. It's important to show that because people want to see what happened to my proposal, and it's important to give them that visibility. And one big challenge of portfolio intake, especially if it's been introduced and it hadn't been there before, is you can expect to do plenty of hand-holding. There needs to be a lot of help available for people because they'll have questions in navigating the field. They'll have other questions. So expect to do plenty of hand-holding for the intake. And finally, it also might be good to have some kind of a reporting page. We covered this when we said provide visibility to project proposals. It might be good to provide it through a web page or some report where we say, here are the 10 projects that were introduced into the portfolio this week or this month. So that was the portfolio intake and assessment. Now let's talk about the next component of a basic portfolio, which is reporting and performance monitoring. The most popular system of performance monitoring that we'll see is a red, yellow, green system. Most projects everywhere have a red, yellow, green. And this system of showing performance through the red, yellow, green has many disadvantages. The biggest disadvantage is there are no standard meanings to red, yellow, and green. One person's red could be another person's yellow. Or the other way of looking at it is two projects that are both marked red may be very different. One might just have small issues. The other project might be in serious trouble. So end of the day, there is no standardization about these colors and what they mean. So that's why we've introduced a new approach to project reporting. Basically, we assign a red, yellow, or green based on a formula as to whether that every task in a project gets a red, yellow, or green. And that is assigned based on whether it is late, about to be late, or on time. So if a project has 50 lines or 50 tasks, each task is either red, late, yellow, about to be late, or green, not late. And it provides a measure of uniformity when you statistically add up all these reds, yellows, and greens in a project, and then decide whether the project on the whole is red or yellow or green. For example, if more than half the tasks in a project are red, then it's fair to say the project is red. Maybe half of the project tasks are yellow, then it's good to say, the project is in yellow status. Simultaneously, if most of the project has green, if green is the largest number of tasks, then it could be fair to say that the project is green. So what this does is it creates a measure of standardization. In other words, it's no longer the subjective opinion of a project manager deciding whether a project is red, yellow, or green. It's a statistical aggregation of the individual tasks, and which in turn are determined by a formula. So at the very basic level, all projects are treated in a uniform way, and this provides some actionable direction to the portfolio reporting. Okay, so we saw two important components of the portfolio: portfolio intake, and reporting on performance. Now let's look at the other two building blocks that go into implementing a basic portfolio. The next key component of a basic portfolio is resource management. Resources, or that's how we refer to the people working on the projects, they are the active ingredient that actually makes the projects and portfolios go forward. So it's very important to manage them wisely. What does that mean? It means understanding who is working on what project and where do we have a lack of resources. For example, we might have a very important project, very strategic, adding an immense amount of capabilities to the enterprise, and we look at it in detail and we realize we don't have the right kind of resources, or we don't have enough. So that's when it's important to take a look and say, well, what's everybody working on, and what can we de-emphasize to get this extremely important project done? So resource management has many, many uses. Another big use of resource management is understanding when we're doing too many projects. This is a common pitfall in so many organizations. We take on too many projects because we don't understand that we are already tapped out in terms of resources. By managing resources, it helps you see that and say, okay, we can't take any more unless we terminate some projects. And that causes some really tough and productive conversations. The final component of a basic portfolio is annual planning. What is annual planning? Annual planning is a process by which every department, every team in the organization comes forward and puts all their demand and needs and capacity on the table. In other words, they're saying, I need to do these 20 projects. And then come discussions where people discover interdependencies. For example, sales and marketing are heavily dependent on IT to get many of their tools running, maybe stand up new systems, maybe retire obsolete new systems. So they need to know that IT has all these efforts on their roadmap for the next year. And other way around, other departments might have dependencies on other projects, other departments might have dependencies on yet other teams. So annual planning is a way for everybody to come forward, connect as a group, put all their needs and capacity on the table, and then for the organization to decide as a group what is the best basket of projects that the organization should be doing next year. So if these 4 components are implemented: intake, reporting and performance, resource management, and annual planning, that collectively is called the basic portfolio. Although the term says basic portfolio, this is actually a huge capability that most organizations lack today. So basic is actually quite a bit capable. So the only reason we call it basic is it's the stepping stone to the next level, which is the advanced portfolio. So once again, to reiterate, the basic portfolio adds an immense amount of capabilities to an organization. And getting these 4 components done must be the first step in any organization's portfolio journey. Now let's look at taking PPM to the next level, which is the advanced portfolio. So the advanced portfolio does everything the basic portfolio does, but in addition, it does a few things. The foremost of these is budget management and also benefit management. What is budget management? Every organization has a limited number of dollars. So budget management is the process of allocating these dollars to projects in a way that maximizes the throughput. So by allocating the budget to the right projects in the right proportion, the organization maximizes the yield or the benefit to the whole org. That's budget management. And this can be, this can involve several things. Number one, as we touched upon briefly, it can involve, do we start projects before knowing whether we have the money to start them? That's one. And then are projects or some projects using up more money than they thought? So we'll need to be careful so we don't run out of money. On the flip side, some projects may not be using the money that they have. So we could take that money and give it to other projects that might be in need. All this is involved in budget management. Benefit management is sort of the what do I get for my money kind of conversation. It's well known that all projects promise a lot before they start executing, but after they finish executing, it might be hard to take stock of exactly what did this project provide us. So benefit management provides a standard, orderly way to understand what is contributed by a project. The next thing to think about is strategic attainment. So what is strategic attainment? So if you'll see some mature, high-performing organizations have a pretty good idea where they want to go over the next 1, 2, 3 years. That's their strategic journey. In year 1, they're capable of a certain amount of strategic capabilities. In year 2, they're capable of more strategic capabilities, and so on and so forth. Now, it's very important to remember, just defining a strategy is not enough. It's a very important step, but it's not enough. A strategy is actually delivered by the individual projects. So it's only when the individual projects succeed that the strategy succeeds. To do that, you have to have 2 things. You need to have a linkage between the strategy and the projects. For example, if someone says, we need to have a system where our customers can transact with us at any time of day or night, that translates to, among other things, a highly available system that's always available for customers to go in any time zone and bring it up on the browser and execute. So a project that promotes high availability website is in line with the strategic goal of anytime, anywhere. So it's important to take the strategy and break it down into all these individual units. And When I say units, I mean the projects, of course. So with a good portfolio, with an advanced portfolio, you'll be able to do that. You'll be able to say which strategic initiatives, which strategic objectives align to which projects. And then you'll know if the projects are complete, if they delivered, then you know that naturally you're going to succeed in those strategic objectives. Okay, so far we saw several things that define a basic portfolio and an advanced portfolio, but there's something more to a portfolio than just the components we spoke about. There are some support systems that can make all the difference if the portfolio is succeeding or not. And they are the politics of portfolio management, for one. There's a lot of politics when it comes to portfolio management. And then it would be a mistake to think that a lone heroic portfolio manager can do everything we described so far. Usually it takes a team, and the team is called the portfolio office. And we'll see the kinds of skill sets that need to be in a portfolio office. And finally, everything we discussed before in the past several slides involves change. When you're asking an organization to fill out a portfolio intake form or to think in terms of aligning strategy with the project or think in terms of reporting project performance in a different way, you're introducing change. And for the organization to digest all this change, we need to follow some change management best practices. Without that, we could do everything, throw it all at the organization and find that the uptake is very poor, adoption is very poor. And then the portfolio just can't run well if that's the case. Finally, let's look at where do I start? We covered a lot of ground in the previous slides. So many things to look at, so many things to be cognizant of. Where do I start? What's my quickest way to an effective portfolio that delivers value to my organization and to my customers? So the short answer is building a portfolio is not a one-size-fits-all. There are levels. Every organization is different. The best way to navigate this journey to a quick finish line is to get the book, The New Dynamic of Portfolio Management. It's available on Amazon for pre-order. If you get the book, you'll notice that the book straight away organizes itself into your journey according to your need. So you can quickly map a path from start to finish using the book. And that will tell you what you immediately need to do and how to take the next step. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate your time in patiently listening to this talk on portfolio management. I wish you all the best in creating and running your value-driven portfolios.